Hey guys, Wormy Horror here. The following 5 stories are true to the best of my knowledge and can be found on the subreddit Let's Not Meet. If you like the following stories, please make sure to leave a like, a comment, or subscribe, especially if you'd like to keep updated with the channel. Without further delay, here are 5 true creepy stories. When I was 4, in the late 80s, my mother was pregnant with my little sister. My older sister, who was 10 at the time, and I had gone with my mom to one of her prenatal doctor's appointments. In the office, I grew restless, so my mom told my sister to take me out to the van and wait for her to finish up her exam. When we walked out of the doors to go to the van, there was a man standing there. He was right outside of the doors, facing the parking lot, but he turned to look at us as we exited. He was tall, at least to me, overweight, and had bright red hair, and he was wearing a denim pair of overalls. He was swinging his arms back and forth, and each time his hands would meet behind his back, he would clap them together. Then they would swing forward and clap in front of him. Swing, clap, over and over again. I remember feeling very frightened of him immediately, as did my sister. As we were walking past him, he said to us, "Look at those little girls. I like little girls." I was only 4 years old, but I knew something was wrong about the way that he had said that. My sister grabbed my hand and whispered, "Don't look at him." As we walked, he began to walk after us at a slow pace, still swinging and clapping his arms. It was almost as if he was fine with us walking away from him, because the farther away from the building, the more privacy he'd have. We hurried to our van and got inside. My sister told me to lie down on the floor behind the middle seat, so I did, and she locked all of the doors immediately and laid down beside me. He got to the van right after she laid down. We could see him looking through all of the windows and hear him jiggling the door handles and saying, "Where are you, little girls?" in a way that you could hear a creepy smile in his voice. We lay there in fear, just waiting. Finally, it all stopped. I don't know if someone came out of the doctor's office and interrupted him, or what, but suddenly, everything was quiet. We were afraid he was still out there, so we kept lying there until my mom came out. I don't know if this man was insane, or mentally challenged, or just evil, but I do think that he would have molested us had he been able to get to us. About 2.5 years ago, I had my son when I was 16. This being my first child, I was extremely overprotective, but my mom insisted that I ease it a little and try not to be so overprotective. Anyways, it was my son's first year checkup, and he had just started walking, and the clinic I was in was rather small, and they had just given my son an injection that was mandatory. As I was waiting in a waiting area for his prescriptions, he began to get fussy and wanted to walk and play with the little loopy rings on a table. I was very aware of my surroundings, and I noticed an older looking man with his 2 children. The only reason I knew that they were his is because they kept calling him Dad, but the weird thing was that he would have his hand up his son's upper thigh and was constantly rubbing it. The kid was around 8, and he wasn't at all weirded out by this, and in fact it seemed normal to him. From eavesdropping, I learned that he only saw his kids on certain days, and this day he had them and was waiting to get them checkups. Not important, but the other kid was about 10, and she too didn't seem put off by him rubbing his younger brother's thigh. This same guy had a band-aid on his finger, and he was weirdly showing it to younger children, like, "Hey, look at my finger, I got hurt, but it doesn't pain me, and you should touch it because it's funny." That was a big red flag. My son was casually walking around this little room, and I wouldn't have let him since I was very overprotective, but my mom insisted, and I thought that, hey, we're at the doctor's, so what harm could it possibly do? I guess it's fine to let him walk around a bit. I was wrong. My son passes by the weird man slowly, and the guy does the, "Hey, look at my finger" thing. I go and grab him since I did not feel comfortable. As I pick him up and start walking away, This creep half stands up from his seat and grabs my son's hand as if he'd had this overwhelming temptation to touch him and this was his last chance. I turn around and full of anger tell him to never touch my son again. It was loud and everyone saw and heard, and I guess they weren't expecting it from someone like me. I felt it was right, and I knew some people were agreeing silently. Before this, he was playing with a little girl who was sitting on her mother's lap and making her laugh, and the mom looked incredibly uncomfortable, but looked as if she didn't want to be rude and didn't say anything other than motioning for her daughter to try and play with her phone instead of this creep's weird bandaged finger. After that, our prescriptions were ready and we left right afterwards. I hope I never see this man again. This happened to me some years ago. I've never known what to say about it, and I've only ever told one person what happened, and even then, not the specifics. I'm still not sure whether I misinterpreted the situation or not, but I was really creeped out by this encounter, and I still am. I'm female, and at the time of this story, I was 22. I was in grad school, and I'd occasionally go to see a quite wonderful male nurse named Steve at the campus health center for prescriptions and checkups and whatnot. Over the course of my first semester, I found that I'd stopped having my period for no discernible reason. Pregnancy was not a possibility, seeing as I'm gay. Steve ran some tests, found abnormal hormone levels, and was concerned that I had an endocrine problem. He gave me a referral to see a specialist at a nearby medical center. Unfortunately, when I tried to make the appointment, I learned that the specialist he'd referred me to was booked up to 4 months in advance. The woman I spoke to suggested that I see a different specialist in the department. "He's very good," she said, so I agreed. I showed up for the appointment, and when I said who I was coming to see, the secretary said those same words. "He's very good." I entered the office. The specialist was a very elderly man. I remember feeling faint surprise that he's still working at his age. I told him what was going on, that I haven't had a period in over a year, etc., and he says he needs to examine me. He has me stand. He pulls my jeans and panties away from my waist a little, looks down, and asks me if I've always had hair there. This is when I started to feel uncomfortable. I tried to justify it to myself. I have a hormone imbalance, so it doesn't seem like an unreasonable question, I thought. But there's something about the way he said it that I didn't like. He has me pull up my shirt about halfway and puts his hands on either side of my waist, patting up and down. I didn't like it at all. After that, he asks me a few more questions about my medical history, orders some tests, and I leave. I was supposed to see him again in a few months, and I already didn't want to come back. Afterwards, I tried to talk to myself out of feeling so creeped out. I kept telling myself that he was a professional, and that everyone said that he was very good. My fear was completely unfounded, etc., etc., etc. At the same time, in the following months, I found myself Googling his name to see if anything came up. I don't really know what I was looking for. I found nothing except that he was a very highly regarded expert on endocrine disorders. The feeling didn't go away, and then he called me for the follow-up. He talked about test results which were inconclusive and reminds me of the next appointment. And then he says this: "And last time I didn't examine your breasts last time, so we'll need to do a breast check and take care of that." This is paraphrased, but I remember hearing what sounded like eagerness enter into his voice. When the call ended, I decided I was done. I was never going into that office again. I wish that I had just waited for an appointment with the other specialist, the one Steve had known and actually referred me to. I didn't actually do anything about the upcoming appointment right away. I think I hoped it would go away somehow on its own. I'm confused about the timeline of this, but I had other phone calls from him. He tended to call early in the mornings, sometimes while I was asleep. I remember getting a voicemail that was something like, Emily, where are you, Emily?" I remember being really irritated about the volume and amount of calls. I'm sure it was under 10, but it seemed excessive for a doctor I'd only seen once. Finally, I just called his office and canceled the appointment. The receptionist asked repeatedly if I would like to reschedule, and I told her repeatedly that I just wanted to cancel. Even afterwards, I questioned what had happened a lot. As I've said, I'm gay and I'm also shy, particularly with men, so I kept going back and forth on whether the creep factor was real or whether I was just being weird about the situation because he was a man. The thing that gets me though is that I really like the male on-campus nurse. We got along really well and I trusted him completely, so gender alone wasn't the issue. It wasn't age either, because Steve was definitely over 50 years old. There were also other little things. A roommate of mine mentioned how her male doctor was required to keep the door cracked open and or have a female nurse present during physical examinations. That certainly was not the case with the doctor I had seen. I barely breathed a word of this incident to anyone. I told half of it to my best friend months later, but even then, I couldn't bring myself to talk about the details. I didn't tell her anything about what he said on the phone. In some ways, I feel like this is just a ridiculous story that's all in my head, but the creep feeling has never gone away. When I was 20, I was hospitalized due to immunodeficiency for multiple infections, including one that had to be surgically removed. A lot of crazy stuff happened during that visit, including being misdiagnosed with AIDS and a flesh-eating bacteria. This was at one of the best hospitals in the United States though. But this was by far the scariest thing that occurred during my stay. One night, about 3 a.m. I think, one of the nurses came in. I woke up because I had slept a lot that day, and the bright lights in the hall bothered me. It wasn't my normal male nurse, but an older woman, maybe mid to late 40s. I had never seen her before, and she looked very severe. She didn't acknowledge me at all, even when I greeted her and asked her questions. Instead, finally, she said, "Time for your medication," or something like that. I tried to respect that she didn't want to talk and just faced forward again. Also, because it hurt to move, but I noticed that she had a much larger volume syringe than usual. My morphine dose was always given in a 10 to 20 syringe, but this thing was huge, like a 100 to 500 syringe, and the accuracy couldn't be that good, so I turned my head again and asked, trying to sound friendly and interested, what my dosage was and if she was sure that she had the right person. She ignored me and I continued, "Because I think maybe, normally my dosage is a lot lower. Wouldn't you mind double checking please?" She only said, "Go to sleep, this will be over soon," injected the medication, and left. I was kinda out of it. I was just so used to all of this stuff going on around that I figured I was mistaken. I tried to go back to sleep, but even before the medication hit me, I felt like there was something wrong. I thought about kinking the IV line, which would of course cause the alarm to go off, and forcing the issue. But I just told myself to calm down and try to go back to sleep. They do this for a living after all, and it was probably just the change of nurse that was bothering me, I thought. So after a time, I don't really know how much time, I started to feel more genuinely and undeniably weird. First, everything felt hot, or rather hot on the outside, like I'm radiating heat from the surface of my skin everywhere, but cold on the inside of my skin. Around then, I started to notice that everything had turned a shade of red and it was all pulsing with what I imagine was my heartbeat. So I'm staring at the ceiling in the dim and everything I can see is through the red filter pulsing slightly. I can feel goosebumps on every inch of my body. Then I can feel nothing. I lose all sensation in my skin. I can still feel pressure, but I can't feel anything else, except intricate ripples across my body as though I'm naked and the window is open, and eventually, even these fade. But they're a good example of the mental confusion that had set in. For example, after a while, I couldn't tell if my eyes were open or closed, if I was actually seeing or thinking I was seeing. When all sensation finally left me, I felt like I was floating about 5 feet off the surface of the bed. I realize as I'm testing my ability to sense things that I'm having a hard time moving. Moving my hand or arm took a concentrated effort. At this point, I somehow managed to hit the call button, for which I am later grateful. But nothing felt emergent. The whole thing comes with a warm fuzziness, so I spent a little time just playing with trying to move my hands or arms, watching them before realizing I'm not actually looking at them. Around this time, I can only barely move my wrists, not even my arms or fingers, and my legs were as if they were a foreign country. I started to feel concern. I realized on some deeper level in the back of my mind that the feeling that I was having in the pit of my stomach was clenching concern, and that this actually has the potential to be very dangerous. I want to hit the button again, or even call out, but I am just too tired. My muscles wouldn't move, and now I notice that the pulsing isn't as frequent as it was. Though it was only upon reflection later on that I fully realized the significance of that. So I kind of mentally slapped myself and set about consciously focusing on breathing, in and out, and don't forget in, that's the hard part. It felt like the nurse never responded, for what I would have guessed that it had been 20 to 35 minutes at least. But suddenly, as if in slow motion, it seemed like a lot of things happened all at once. There had been this growing tension in me. If I could have flexed all my muscles, I imagine that is what I was feeling. I was fighting something very hard, and then my nurse came in. My male nurse, whom I had thought was out for the night. The moment I hear the door open coincides with a sudden release of all of the heavy mass that had settled over me, like a soft, heavy blanket that wouldn't let me move. I suddenly sat up and projectile vomited into the bathroom next to the nurse who was just walking in. Sorry, I know it's gross, but basically, my body had collected all of whatever the old nurse had put in and got rid of it. After that, I could move. I could even speak after a few minutes. My nurse seemed relieved to say the least. He cleaned it up and sat next to me and talked for a while. He said that another nurse had been trying to help him and mixed up the dosage by accident, but he didn't seem to want to give much detail. I never found out what that woman's intentions were, whether it was an honest mistake or not. Around this time, last year, I was at the hospital. I had cartilage from my knee grafted to my ankle, so I had a knee the size of a football, and my ankle was broken and bolted back together. The hospital was occupied to the last bed, so I shared a room with two elder men in the urology ward instead of the surgery ward. There was only one night nurse for up to 20 rooms, so she barely checked on us more than once a night. It was my second of 7 nights. Usually, I have a very light sleep, but I was drugged up to no end with painkillers, so I slept like a rock. At around 3 a.m., I woke up to a light hitting my face. I thought it was the night nurse coming to empty the catheter bag of one of the other men, since it was, after all, the urology ward. I turned my head to look over, but there's no one in our room. I was still half asleep, dizzy, and couldn't quite focus, but I could see a shadow on the wall coming from the room's door. I turned my head again, and there's someone standing in the door, slightly rocking back and forth. It took me another minute to focus, but then there he was, an old man, skinny, in a Johnny shirt. He noticed me, stared at me, and does the old finger on the lips shh as he took a step back and slowly closed the door. A part of me thought that my mind was playing tricks, and soon enough, thanks to the medication, I was soon back to sleep. Fast forward to the next morning, and the nurse comes in, and I asked her if there was someone lost last night. She told me that there was this old guy straight out of surgery that had a paradox reaction to a drug. He woke up thinking he was in jail. He walked across the entire hospital with a bleeding wound from his kidney surgery, trying to escape prison. I'm a huge guy and don't get scared easily, but I was so vulnerable at that time that this one really got to me. If you enjoyed the previous stories and would like to hear more similar creepy stories, then 2 of my previous videos are linked to in the description and can also be seen by clicking the annotations on the screen. If you like the video, please show your support by subscribing, liking, sharing, and commenting on the video. Additionally, if you'd like to hear more of my stories, please feel free to subscribe so that you will be notified of any new videos I post. Thanks for watching, and stay safe.